Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Meridians 20th anniversary celebration. We are so glad to have you all here. Thank you if you've been with us since Thursday evening. This is our second to last panel of the day and our second to last panel of the conference. It has been a very beautiful conference the past couple of days, and I'm so grateful to have been running it in the back end and also to finally be with our audience in person and face to face. I'm joined here today with Myriam, Chancy, Nikky, Finney, and Laurie Guerrero. This panel is called Paper, Water, Fire, Speaking Poetically for Ourselves. We are going to be speaking about the poetry in our 20th anniversary reader. And I must say that Suhair Hamad also has a poem in this reader, but she's not able to join us today. But it is important that we speak her name. First Writing Since is the poem in this anthology, and it's beautiful, and it is kind of works in theme of some of the things we'll be talking about today, like documentation and poetry in the space of academics and academia. And so I just want to start by saying hello to our panelists and hearing from you, and also hearing your poems. And Nikky, if you would start us off, that would be great.
I will. Hello to everybody on a Saturday. And Maghan, thank you for bringing us together, and thank you to Meridians. I had to be here because of some things that I'll say later, but Meridians plays a really important, the journal plays a very important role in my life as a published writer. And I'll talk about that after, when we get into conversation. The making of paper. This is the only poem I've ever written where the epigraph is longer than the poem, I think. In the early 80s, I spent 2 years in a writing workshop that Toni Cade Bambara held in her Atlanta home. Anybody in the community who was writing was welcome. I adored the opportunity to sit at this great writer's feet, who knew so much about so much. In 1990, she moved to Philadelphia and was later diagnosed with cancer. We talked on the long distance line when we could. I would always ask if there was anything she needed that I could send. She usually answered no. But in our last conversation, which took place 1 week before she crossed over, she held the phone a little longer. Maybe, she said, maybe you could send some paper. And what about one of those fat, juicy pens? Imagine that. You asking me for paper. For the record, let me state, I would hunt a tree down for you, stalk it until it fell all loud and out of breath in the forest, much as I love a tree, fat, tall, and free. But on the copper penny eyes of my grandmother, I tell you this, I would hunt a tree down for you, and when found, I would pull it all the way down the road through congested city streets all by myself, and deliver it straight away to your hospital bed. One single extra large floral arrangement, something loud and free with red and purple bow. Or better yet, this tree-loving, gun-hating Geechee girl would strap a Wild West gun belt machete around her hips, enter the worst part of the woods alone, and go trunk to trunk until the right one appeared, growing peaceful in its 1,000-year-old natal plot. Look it right in its round, rough, ancient eyes and confess away. Tell it straight to its woody face, my about to do deed. I'd even touch it on its limbs, fingers begging forgiveness, give as much comfort to it as I could while trying to explain the necessariness of its impending death. Me standing there, my gorilla, my love eyes spilling all over everything, sending up papyrus prayers that all begin with, I'm so sorry, but Toni Cade needs paper. Only then would I slash its lovely body into 1 million thin black cotton rag sheets, just your uncompromising size. Send you some paper? Oh, yeah. Paper is coming, Tony Cade. Wagon loads in the name of your sweet black writing life from black writers everywhere, refusing to leave the arena to the fools. Paper is on the way.
Thank you so much, Nikky. And I have to say, we heard you perfectly. And so I know that Tony Cade was present
Yes.
with us. And then we'll move forward with you, Laurie.
Well, thank you, Nikky. Loved hearing you read. Always love hearing you read. This poem is called "How I Put Myself Through School," and I wrote it when I was a non-traditional aged Ada Comstock scholar at Smith. How I put myself through school. She has a refrigerator shelf labeled organic meats, caviar, the woman whose house I clean. The wine rack too for the Chilean, Australian, French, Chardonnays, Sauvignons, so I'll know. I sort her cupboards, her junk drawers, nail clippings, receipts, catalogs, while her daughters, the underweight darlings, stare as I reshelve their dolls and brand new books. Stare as their mother stares. Stare as I pour the ajo y cebolla of my blood into a pot of rice that will end up in the trash because of its spice. Stare as I shake the wrinkles out of faded cotton panties and boxer shorts, the lingering heat of the dryer taking me to a bedroom I never wanted to be in. Sweat beating at the bridge of my nose, I accept the clothes she collects in trash bags for my daughters, who are younger, but much bigger, knowing they'll never fit, and wonder how many times I'll have to slice the tongue out of my mouth, chop my wrist at the hands, hear my babies ask, "Why do we take their used things, Mama?"
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. I am so excited to speak about these poems. And our last poem will be by Myriam, Chancy. And I am going to share screen for this because we have a lovely slideshow that goes along with it.
And can you just do a thumbs up or a sign that is when it's playing?
Yes. Can you still see me?
I can see you. So this is a poem that I wrote in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake in 2010. Underwater, Memorial Day, May 31st, 2010. For the departed for Haiti, and in reference to Asako Narahashi's Half Awake and Half Asleep in the Water photograph 2001. Underwater, sinking, eyes closed, listening to the voices, the sea, hopeful, not to drown, remembering, arms wide, mantra. The body is but water and salt, will float up sooner or later, deep under sky water, salt swimming open eyes. The ocean murmurs from the depths, her belly broken to jagged shore. This time, I would gladly have taken them in my womb for all eternity. Arms stirring blue light, staying afloat, listening to waves, drumming eulogy, remaining under as long hold of breath possible, in fear of surfacing, in fear of the angry aria of the nameless dead riding the gales, tumbling down defiled mountains over in defense of wreckage of hurricanes, the sheet of sheen above like ice to break, treading water, invisibly, slowly, methodically. Waters embracing like folds of blankets, treading the dark, pensively. What could be the answer to the riddle tectonics shifts if movement could stop time, turn back clocks, tread she would for 7 and a day to reach the hour of before when an afternoon of slumber meant nothing more than heat, sweat, flies buzzing, the rooster's cry, thirst for the sea, bracing under, descending to the never, to Vilocan, to dance the dead, the living gods, our ancestors, never to utter, I'm swamped, I'm buried alive, mindless phrases, swimming against the ether, all limbs intact to brace against the never, to be ever, ever again, the never of again. Moving very slowly, this is what the sea sung, to carry the dead as our mothers carried us, not to remain submerged and folded in her layers, pulsing waters. Push the lullaby, push, push up. What remains on shore is for us all to bear. The air, fresh of despair, the stale hope. Let us carry our mothers as they have carried us.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for those readings of your work. It is so different to read them myself and then to hear you read them. It is a very special moment. Thank you. I want to get right into it because what I realized when reading all these poems right away is that there is a lot of documentation here and perhaps a lot of process as well. Documenting care and destruction and what it means to be a working class mother or caretaker and student, what it means to provide for a beloved teacher and mentor and friend. And I want to talk about the importance of that documentation and specifically using poetry, because I think perhaps all poets, I know that all poets come at poetry a little bit differently. And for myself, I have a bit of that processing of events, of people in my own work. And so I'm curious about what it means to you and why you wrote these poems. And anyone, please feel free to start.
I'm happy to start if people are feeling shy. Out of the three of us, I think I'm the least poetic. I'm an occasional poet, and my poem was actually a Facebook post that I was writing over the course of several weeks after months of giving talks, political talks, writing op-eds about the aftermath of the earthquake. And, you know, the reason I was on Facebook for the first time at that time, a former student at Smith created my Facebook because she told me it was the best way to help track the dead. And I remember writing to Evelyne Trouillot, who's also a Haitian writer, who was at one of the Université de l'État, because I was trying to track down some students for other people. And I remember this was a couple of weeks after the earthquake. I got a messenger mail from Evelyne saying, you know, the person you're looking for was a Haitian student who was being tracked by professors at the University of Puerto Rico. She said, he is alive, but all of your contacts are dead. And this was 6 or 7 people. And so then I had the burden of informing my colleagues in Puerto Rico that all of their colleagues were dead. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that I'll be able to carry forward, but I had to. And so I started writing Facebook posts. This was in the days where, you know, we used to have a little something that would pop up at the top of the screen with your thoughts for the day. And this is why you have the ellipses throughout the poem. And I actually didn't start writing about the earthquake creatively until, you know, several years later, which is what the novel you see behind me, with Storm Wet Thunder, which will come out this fall, because I really had no intention of writing about the earthquake at all. But Gina Ulysse was a guest editor for a special edition of Meridians in 2011 and asked me for something. And I thought, well, all I have is this poem, which captured the feeling I had at the time of being submerged, being really under something that couldn't readily be expressed, and that most people in my environment at the time, which was the Midwest of the USA, could not understand, could not fathom, right? That in 45 seconds, 300,000 people died. And 1.7 million were left homeless. And so this was just an expression of a disarray at the time, and the poetic voice was the easiest for me to access at the time.
Thank you, Myriam. I think it's very, perhaps fascinating isn't the best word, to think that this poem was born out of a Facebook status, a developing Facebook status. And yes, thank you for sharing that story. Laurie.
Yeah, thank you. When I was writing this piece, How I Put Myself Through School, I, as I mentioned, was a non-traditional age student. I was almost 30 and had 3 small children. And so for me, documenting the experience of taking of having to take a job, cleaning someone else's house, for me, I often thought about my ancestors and the work of my ancestors, and I come from people who picked cotton and fruit and who migrated and followed the crops, and eventually became construction workers or house cleaners, or and so for me, documenting this, and honestly, this was back in 2009 when I wrote this poem. It was a long time ago. And I don't think I was totally aware of what I was doing even at the time. I just knew it was necessary to document. But now looking back, I realized that, this writing the details of this work, for me felt very much like, or feels very much like, I was also documenting what was not documented in the lives before me. I come from people who are illiterate or semi-literate. And so to have the ability to write, to the fact that I was doing this work so that I could be in school, so that I could be at Smith, I feel like that was really important. And I think that kind of documentation was both honoring the history I come from, but at the same time, changing the course of it. And so this becomes this documentation of that, and I think that that's why it was really important to mention my own daughters in the poem. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Poems as archives. I adore the way that they function in all forms. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the documentation or documenting sometimes throws me. But I think when someone asked me a couple of months ago about the documentary poetry that I write, I couldn't answer for a long time, because I started thinking about how that word kind of, I don't know, takes me away from what I'm doing sometimes. I know I'm documenting, but there's a closer word for me, like saving, remembering, putting away. Who else is gonna save what I value but me? I mean, I'm a Black woman in America and in the diaspora, and the world has tried to kill us. Black and brown women is still trying in every kind of way possible, as documented by the first 2 poets who read their work, And so when Toni Cade Bambara, when I found out she was sick and I was calling her, not knowing what to say and not knowing how to help, I actually wanted to get in a car and drive up to Philadelphia and just stand by the door or sit by the bed, do what my people did when people were sick in the family. And I was like, that sounds stupid. That sounds silly. I didn't know how to be present. So I just kept calling. And I think I wore her down, and she finally, because she would say, no, I'm good. And she would sound upbeat. And then finally she said, oh, okay. I need some paper and a pen. And I was like, what? I'll run this over. This is way before Amazon or anything else. Not that I would call them, but I wanted to save what this great American writer and what my great teacher wanted in the last stages of her life, on the last days of her life, really. There was also a hat. I sent her a hat, a funky hat. She loved hats. And so I just wanted to be present in that moment with her. And I wanted to save this moment that I had before she left, because really all communication had really kind of shut down. She wasn't writing much anymore. And so I also wanted to state for the record what I would do for her because of what she had done for me. And for me to cut down a 1,000-year-old tree, I don't know if I know what it meant for me to say that, or to be violent in some kind of way in trying to give her something that she would need before she left this earth. I wanted that to be on the record.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting to hear you say that the word documenting throws you off. But I think saving or remembering does feel closer, and it does feel more intimate. And I often think of the moments when crazy or exciting things are happening to me, and then all of a sudden I'm writing a poem in my head. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to save this moment. I'm trying to make sure that I remember it. Yeah, so that's I do feel like that's a more apt phrasing. Continuing with thinking about Toni Cade Bambara, I was reading part of What It Is I Think I'm Doing, and she speaks about developing a listening habit and seeking out teachers at every turn. And she kind of documents what her idea of a teacher is, and then finally gets to the conclusion that anyone with a larger capacity for love than her is a worthy teacher. And so I'm curious, because much of your work, all of your work, perhaps more broadly, seems to be in conversation with lessons learned by teachers through history, through family, through food. And I wonder what it means to you all to be teachers, but to also be students, and to learn and how to recognize those moments. Because I think it can be hard for us humans to accept when we don't know everything. And I know I can speak for myself in that regard, at least. And so I am always trying to realize when something is a teaching moment, and to save it in my heart. And so I asked the question to you.
May I?
Yes.
It's interesting to me. One of the things that I think I was very lucky in that I was born where and to whom I was born. I come from a family of storytellers and teachers. And as I mentioned before, many illiterate and semi-literate. And so this idea of carrying my history with me everywhere I go, and that was sort of instilled in me as a kid. But I didn't understand the gravity of it, I don't think, until probably not even until I left Smith and, came back home to Texas and suddenly had the names for the things that I had been experiencing my whole life and that my mothers had experienced. And one of the things as a teacher now, I'm the writer in residence at Texas A&M San Antonio, and so many of the majority of the students that I have are Latina, and they're also from the same community that I was born and raised in, which is such a gift. And so one of my number one things with all of my students is we never check our history at the door. You bring it with you, with everything you read, with everything you write. And that was a lesson I learned at Smith. I mean, I think it was ingrained in me as a kid, but it was my professors like, Janetta were like, where are you? Where are you at? You know, come at me. Like, let's, you know, what do you have to say? And never having been in a space where that was you know, silence, you know, where I come from. No space to explore, to express, nothing. And so to have that for the first time, not just you have a space for it, but you better have something to say. You know, it was heavy. And so I, you know, I tell my students when we write about love, we write about, you know, all the different kinds of, that's like my graduate class right now is different radical writing as radical love. And so it's this sense of, how do we, like all the different ways in which we can love, right? And the privilege of being in the classroom, because a lot of us are first generation, or a lot of us, you know, never expected to be in that classroom. And so recognizing the privilege of the classroom, but also recognizing the privilege of who we come from, right? That just because we're getting this formal education doesn't mean that our ancestors didn't have an education. And so sort of bringing all of that together and carrying out and hoping that my students carry that out with them also. I think that's just really important to me, and that's something that I try to cultivate in my classroom. And also with people that I'm talking to, I always feel like I'm a student. I always want to learn. I always want to know more. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would love to tell a story. I was interviewing Lucille Clifton, the only interview I ever had with her, and I was telling her this story, trying to think of things to, you know, questions, and I was trying to tell her that when I was in the 5th grade, my family made us, my brother and I, integrate a school because integration had happened, and they pulled me out of a Catholic school where I was, and we had to go to this other school. So we were walking to the building the first day of class, and this white student standing on the side of the building called my brother and I a nigger. And I took my book bag and I pummeled him. Just last fight I've ever had in my life. And and so I was telling Miss Clifton this, I can't remember the context. And I asked her, I said, what happened when I didn't even ask her if she had been called, you know, the N-word. I said, what happened when the first time somebody called you a nigger? And she said, I decided in that moment, dear, this is talking to me. She said, I decided in that moment, dear, that person was no longer reliable. Therefore, I would have to, at that moment, go forward in my life and find all the information, all the ideas, all the creativity, all the things that would make my life I would have to find that for myself. Anybody who looked like him, I would never trust their information in, because he had gotten me wrong. So he was going to get everything else wrong about, and she just went on. And I was like, you didn't hit it? The lesson was, she was teaching me what I couldn't learn in the 5th grade, but what I could learn for the rest of my life, which they are unreliable. So not only do we need to haul them into the courtroom when they kill us, when they 9 minutes of a knee on your neck, 9 minutes of whatever, so we need to do all of that legal stuff, but we also need to make a decision in our mind that anybody who does not see us for who we are and what we are unreliable. And therefore, what does that mean? So you can label them unreliable. That means you have to go find the information for yourself. You have to figure out, you know, Laurie has to teach those students in her class from her own pot, you know, and so does Myriam. We all have to, like, see ourselves as valuable, see ourselves as critical to this discourse without the labels, and just write what we write, believe in what we believe in, and those people who don't see us are unreliable, and we have to value when we can label somebody unreliable and not think it's just something small. It's huge. It was huge in my grandmother's day. She taught me liars, unreliable people, people who don't have your if you don't think with your belly and think with your head. There are two different pots here. You don't just think here, you think here. And meet somebody who name and you can say, Bible, let me keep going. You don't have to take your backpack and swat them in the head like I did as a child. You can say, oh, there's nothing to give me. They can't make me feel small. They can't take anything from me. I know my history. I'm going to teach it in the way that I need to. And so we always must be student and teacher. And we should take the lessons from our elders. Everything we need to know is around us. It's not stuffed in a book. I love books, but in conversations, and it's in asking a question, and it's in me telling that story as much as I can about being unreliable, because it matters so much to me 20 years later that I can tell you that, and that somebody else can say, oh, that I can cut this person out of my life because they're unreliable, and I can go find my own information, and I can trust myself. That's a teacher and a student and a community living all in one. I don't know how I got to talk about that. But.
No, I think it tracks very well in our conversation, and I hope for any students who might be in the chat, this is very important. I think that it is hard to, perhaps even as a young person and maybe even as an older person, to believe that you can trust yourself, that you do know what is reliable versus unreliable. And I think a lot of us, especially probably Black women, are taught that we have to learn something, or there's something valuable in when people hurt us in any regard. And sometimes there just isn't.
I'd like to add to that conversation there, just to pick up on a couple of things, because as Nikky was telling her story, I was thinking of a James Baldwin clip, right, where he says, "I am not your N," right? I'm not that. And if you all in all his writing, whenever he used the N word, it was to deflate its power and to say this is an object that's been created to kill people, right? So in answer to that question, I was going to hold up my James Baldwin books. I'm teaching a Baldwin seminar right now, and this speaks to, Maghan, what you were saying earlier about love, right? Because Baldwin was a preacher of love. And so for me, he's been a great teacher. These are books I had when I was 14, 15 years old, and I haven't replaced them. So there are new editions. My students and I are always, trying to figure out the pagination. But I show them the books because I say, look, I started reading Baldwin when I was 15, 16, because I came across In Search of My Mother's Gardens, Alice Walker, in Winnipeg, Canada, which led me to Zora Neale Hurston and so many other Black writers. Teaching this semester, I've learned from my students. I had one student who, reading Giovanni's Room, when I told him this was a book I had when I was 15 and he's 21, he said, my life would have been so different if I had picked up this book when I was 15 years old, because he's a young queer Black gay man. So, we can find our teachers in books, other writers who took a chance and who fought, for the right to put in writing what they had to say. And I want to echo what Laurie Ann was saying about ancestors, because one of the reasons I wanted to put images to the poem that I read today was because I did document, without the intention of showing those photographs, what I saw in Haiti from 2011 on when I returned to Haiti. And one of the pictures in that clip was a woman, a very elderly woman. You can tell from the gray of her hair, hanging her wash. And this was important for me to document because this was at a time when there was no running water, no clean water available, which is still a problem in Haiti, but this was even worse after the earthquake. And here was an elderly woman, doing her wash on a Monday, which is the traditional wash day in Haiti, because of, a simple call to dignity at a time when there was, no dignity available. So for me, she's somebody who teaches me, just from the side of the road, watching her. And then I have a painting here painted by a very, very young woman who was in IDP camp with her husband, an art teacher who had lost everything. And she and her husband set up a little school in a, displaced persons camp, teaching whoever wanted to express themselves in art. And so she was younger than I when I bought that painting, and she was teaching me, and they were so full of hope, hope in a hopeless situation. So I think we can learn from so many things. And I think one of the things I would say is that I do think it's important, as Lorianne was saying, about writing down, those of us who have access to writing, because I do think we need to, like Baldwin did, like we all do, we do need to add to the archive so that people can find us later on, whether they're African American or Haitian or Puerto Rican or Dominican, whatever their backgrounds are, so they see themselves in the literature, so they see themselves, remembered, forever forward. So all of these things are important.
Yes, thank you, Myriam. Also, that story and the photo of the woman reminds me just very much of the Haitian women in my family and how they have taught me how to continue, particularly in distress, things that we do because we need to continue. And I just want to kind of bring that lesson in as well. Before we move on to my question, which has to do with Meridians, we do have a question about in our little Q&A box that I think is an interesting one. It says, following up to my point about documenting and remembering and saving, as poets and as artists, are there memories and moments that you choose to keep for your personal archive and choose not to put into a poem for the public? How do you decide what is for art and what is for the self?
Well, there's a reason why I'm a novelist and not a poet like Lorianne and Nikky are, in a grounded kind of way, because fiction allows you not that there's not the poetic, persona, the artifice that you can create there as well. But I think with fiction, you can really pick and choose those things that you release, but they're informed by your lived experience and the things that haunt you, as well as the things that inspire you. But I don't think everything is to be consumed. But it's a gift. I think writing is a gift that you'd give to others. And in the same way that when you create a gift or you create a dish for someone, you put your best elements and ingredients there, that's what you do with your writing.
I think for me, I remember I published my first poem when I was 16 years old, and it was about my parents' divorce. And I remember my mother, when my mother saw it, she just kind of cried and said, that's my life. How can you put my life out there? And I felt really bad for a long time. And then I realized, after a few days, it's my life. It's my life, but as I got older, and especially when I became a mother, I started to understand more and more, what she was feeling. But I think, I certainly, when my kids were very little and being very conscious of my mother and my parents and dirty laundry and the things like that. But as a writer, that's how I process. And so I've learned I know for a fact that I need to write things out just so that I can understand them, understand where I stand on things, whether it's a personal thing or a political thing. I have to write it out. Now, then deciding what becomes, something I want to publish or not, that's a whole different thing. And so there were things that I would keep to myself if I felt like it was going to hurt somebody. But now I'm in my 40s now, and my kids are in their 20s, and I've become more, and as I'm getting older, and especially as I have students who are in their 20s and 30s, like I see myself, my younger self in my students, and I think about the kind of things that I'm writing now, that I wish I had when I was a younger mother. I wish I had, and so now I'm feeling more and more like I don't want to hold anything back anymore. whether it's ugly and humiliating and it's real and it's truth. And I feel like I think I had to be older to, you know, I think I needed to care more about that than about, you know, maybe hurting other people's feelings. I mean, I'm still very concerned about that, but I feel like sometimes it will be, if it feel like it's more help, then it'll do more help than harm. Then I think then that's usually a deciding factor for me. But I'm in a space of learning how to not just self-care and this whole self-care thing, but self-care in terms of who I was when I was 20. Like going back and taking care of that young woman, and then who I was when I had my first child, and then who I was when I got a divorce, and who I was when I lost my grandfather, and you know, and so I'm like retroactively self-care, you know, and so for me, I feel like a lot of the work I'm doing now is you know, is doing that work, and so I don't want to hide that. I don't want to feel ashamed for that, and so I don't want to just keep that to myself.
I have been writing with intention, I should say. I've been writing with intention for about 40 years. And one of the things I love about being a writer is how the clarity that continues to come your way if you stay at it. And I know so many folks who have to give up things they love, like ballet, because their knees are bad, or something else because some part of you breaks down or can't do that anymore. But one of the things I love about being a writer is the lessons. And one of the lessons for me, having writing for 40 years, is I don't know I'm a journal keeper. That's the garden where the poems come from.
Mm-hmm.
When I never know when I begin to write something, if it's for me or if it's for the public, if there's a larger conversation. It happens, the understanding comes in the writing process. And if I'm working on something, if the circle of what I'm working on gets a little wider, if I think that there's something here for a larger audience than myself, then I begin to see that take shape. But I always approach an idea or writing something down as the first step, and there are 50 or 100 or 150 other steps in the middle before I know whether this is going to be something that I share or something that stays for me. And I need the journal. I need a place that's just mine.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be able to tell myself every day that I don't have to share everything.
Mm.
I don't really like this moment we are in as a society where people have to like you and people have to like, you know, I think that my young writers, don't treasure enough the solo time that they have with themselves. They think they have to show it. They think they have to publish it. They think they have to say it aloud. When what you're doing in that private space is you're tending to the interior of yourself. And I just came up believing that interior space was critical for having a space that was then become a public space.
Yes, thank you. I have to say, as a poet myself, I'm somewhere between Laurie and Nikky in that when I first started writing seriously and considered myself a serious poet, I felt like I had to share everything because I was like, well, there's someone like me. There's someone who's a young Black, Haitian, lesbian woman. There's someone who's lost their brother. There's someone whose parents are XYZ. And I'm like, I have to share it all because I know that these tiny, tiny details matter a lot. And then sometime after school and in the past 2 years, I am undergoing what you're talking about, Nikky, which is valuing that inner space a lot more, and understanding that, you know, parts of that can be in a poem, but it's okay for it not to be the very first thing that jumps into a poem. And once again, I hope if there are any students in the audience, I hope that you take that lesson very seriously, because your interior life is potent and it's special, and it's for you ultimately first and maybe only. And so I thank you for those lessons that you've all shared. For our last question, and our panel is coming to a close soon, I want to talk about Meridians. I want to talk about Meridians because it's a journal that primarily publishes scholarship by and about women of color. And of course, over the years, and from the beginning, we've published poetry. But of course, that is not the bulk of the journal. And during my time at Meridians, going through our submissions and even handling our Elizabeth Alexander Creative Writing Award, I've become more curious about poetry's place in Meridians, and what it means to have poetry in the middle of all of this scholarship, and whether or not it's disrupting, or is it bridging, or does it just live on its own? And I wonder how you might think of that. And I also wonder if you tell your students about Meridians, if you encourage them to submit to Meridians, and what Meridians just means to you as creative writers.
Yeah, as the second founding editor of Meridians, it was really important to include a creative writing in all of the issues. I think Kumkum had started that, and then I pushed forward in terms of accepting poetry, memoir, fiction. And I recall, I think it was within the first few months of my tenure that June Jordan passed away. And I remember soliciting a poem from Nikky. I think Lucille Clifton also provided something at the time. So this would have been 2002, 2001, 2002. Angela Davis also did a eulogy. So there's a sense in which I think, especially in the tradition of criticism or production, creative production and criticism in the United States, but this is true in the Caribbean, it's true in Africa, Asia. People express themselves through the poetic first. It is the most accessible, and then expand out from there. And if we don't, within journals like Meridians, include the poetic, include the creative, and when I say the poetic, I'm including memoir and I'm including fiction. These are the texts that actually vivify literary criticism and other kinds of academic pursuits. Without those vital texts, we can't really pursue what we do. And of course, Meridians does a lot more than literary criticism. But the idea behind including the poetic voice was to provide breathing spaces, grounding spaces within the journal. And it was also to make the journal more accessible to more people who are not academics, so that anyone could pick up the journal and find some piece of themselves in the journal. And so I'll stop there because I know we're running out of time, and I want to give space to Laurie and Nikky.
I just want to say that a real iconic moment for me, Maghan, it wasn't. I had published a couple of poems in Meridian before, but a really important moment for me, and it in so many ways was when Paula Giddings asked me in 2007 to write an essay, a personal essay. And I wrote this essay, Inquisitor, Insurgent, Black Woman with Pencil Sharpened. And because I take every invitation as an invitation to write something that I've never written before, I love the invite like that. And so that essay became for me kind of like a origin story, if you will. And it appears in the new book that I published in 2020, Love Childs. And it remains to this day, after all this time, a personal essay that includes all the things that made me, or most of the things that made me who I am. And I would never have gotten that kind of overture, I don't think, from a different kind of journal. Black women at the helm understood that, and I love writing in all forms. I love poetry, that's my first voice, but I also like to try my hand and at all kinds of writing. And Giddings' overture really opened that up for me. I haven't published in a lot of journals and publications. My poems are too long. I have 20 pages. And I refuse to edit them down. Editors say, well, we'll just take a page of it. And I go, no, I'm okay. So I think that when somebody understands where you're coming from and what you'd like to produce, that has been that has happened for me at Meridians, at a journal like Meridians, that has given me space to not have to compromise who I am or what I write, or worry about, that this line right here, this isn't going to go over so well. I think that knowing that allows you, fortifies you to keep writing in the ways that you do. And if it gets published, that's one thing. But I write to write. I don't really write to publish. And I've just been joyful that the few things that I have had in Meridian are things that I'm super proud of.
I think yesterday, or was it Thursday at the opening, I got to see Janetta and Susan Van Dyne and Nancy Saporta Sternbach, they were speaking with Ruth Simmons, but Nancy and Susan and Janetta were my professors when I was at Smith, and the minute they came on screen, I just wept. I suddenly was reminded of the gift that it was to be at Smith, and the strength that these women pulled from me, and so when I was graduating, when Janetta suggested I submit some work to Meridians, I had no idea. I was raising very small babies. I was getting ready to move back to Texas. My life was pretty chaotic. I was also taking care of a grandfather from 2,000 miles away. But speaking about teachers, I think of her asking me to submit something, and then having this poem published. Now looking back, I see it was just the same kind of sort of picking me up and putting me in a place where I needed to be, where I needed to see myself, so that I could be stronger, so that I could do more, so that I could do my work. And so that's how I feel, when I think about Meridians. That's what Meridians did for me. It's just, but before I know we got to go, but I was hoping, because Lucille Clifton's name was invoked, I would like to recite a little tiny short poem. I'm sure you all know it. Please. Come celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life. I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm close to tears, so it's a great time to wrap up. I thank you all for being so generous and for giving us your time. For those of you in our audience, our last session is the editors panel, which Myriam will be a part of. And I thank you. I leave you with that. Much love to you all. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Words coming.